Hi everyone, in this video I want to talk a little bit about the signs in the heavens, and this is the current view from Jerusalem. It's interesting that the moon is just under Virgo's feet currently, and the sun is over here. It's beginning to set. Currently, this is the current time in Jerusalem. But I wanted to talk about the signs because there's a very important date coming up, and there's going to be a very important sign in the heavens on that date, and that date is September 11 that I want to talk about, and I want to talk about what's going to be in the heavens on that day. But another thing that I wanted to point out is the Revelation 12 sign. This is the word sign in the Greek. You can see over here it says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars." And I was just looking at the word sign, or the word wonder, which is actually the word sign in the Greek. And if you look at the definition, you see that it says, well, if you look at the second definition here, it says a sign, prodigy, portent, i.e. an unusual occurrence transcending the common course of nature, of signs portending remarkable events soon to happen. Okay, so the point that I want to make is that signs are given before the event actually takes place. So if the Revelation 12 sign is the sign of the rapture, and I'm talking about the September 23rd sign that's going to be in the heavens, if that is a sign of the rapture, then that means the rapture is not going to happen until sometime after that. And so that's why I'm not so sure that the September 23rd sign is the Revelation 12 sign, because that would mean that the rapture wouldn't take place until the Hebrew year 5778, unless of course the Hebrew year lasts until the 1st of Nisan, and therefore we would still be in year 5777. But this would actually, the September 23rd sign would actually take place after Feast of Trumpets, about 3 days after, and so therefore it would technically be the Hebrew year 5778 based on the current Jewish calendar. Of course, they're not doing it the way God said to do it in the book of Leviticus and in Exodus, when God gave the law to Moses and he said that Nisan 1 would be the first of the year. So it could be that the year lasts until Nisan 1. But if it does end in September, then that would take us into the year 5778, which I'm not sure if that would line up with all the prophecies. Okay, another thing that I wanted to point out is the word over here for clothed. It's actually made up of 2 words. It's made up of the prefix peri, which means around, as in perimeter, and then this word over here, which is the word valo, which means to cast, as in casting out demons. That's the word that was usually used for casting out demons. You can see that the way it's used here. But it's the word that we get the word ballistic from. It means to throw with force. And so it basically means to cast. So she's cast around with the sun. So the sun is cast around her, cast about her. So that's the word for clothed. Okay, and so one could make the argument that she's being cast with the sun currently, even though the sun isn't directly on her. One could make that argument at this point. I'm not saying that this is the Revelation 12 sign, but another thing that I wanted to point out is the 12 stars. If you look over here, you see it has a word upon her head, a crown of 12 stars, but the word in the Greek doesn't really mean upon. It can mean that, but it has a lot of different meanings. It's the word epi, and it can mean on or by, before, over, against, across. It can mean a lot of different things. It just means somewhere around there. And so I was thinking about the 12 stars that would make up Virgo's crown, and I'm thinking that it would probably be referring to a constellation that is a crown. And there's actually 2 constellations here that refer to a crown, and I've talked about these before. That this one over here is the constellation Coma Berenices, and the Alpha Star is the star. I'm not sure if I can get it. I might have to zoom in on it. Okay, I got rid of the atmosphere so I can see it better, and so I'll try to click on it. Okay, so you can see it's the star diadem, which means crown. So this one represents the crown, and the other constellation that represents the crown, which is around Virgo, these are actually both Decan constellations. I believe they're both Decan constellations for Virgo, and then the other one is Corona Borealis, which is this one right here. And if you count the stars in these, you see that this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then if you go over to the star Coma Berenices, it has 3 stars over here, so that would be 8, 9, 10. But then I also noticed that these 2 over here, these 2 dogs, seem to almost be connected to this crown. I believe they represent the 2 witnesses, because they're actually Boötes hunt dogs, and I'll show you that. Okay, it's the constellation Canis Venatici, and it says the constellation represents the hunting dogs of Boötes, the herdsmen. Okay, and so now I want to show you a really important sign that's going to take place on September 11th, and I can talk about those constellations a little more, and why I believe it may be that all of those together make up Virgo's crown. But I've mentioned before how I believe Coma Berenices represents the capstone to the pyramid, because if you go along the ecliptic plane over here and you just connect the dots, it actually makes more of a triangle when you look at it on Sky Live. It's positioned a little bit differently, but you can see that it forms a triangle. But even if it doesn't make an exact triangle when you connect the dots, it still represents an angle, which Jesus is the chief cornerstone, or the chief angle, and I'll show you the scripture for that a little bit later. But this represents an angle, which is what Jesus is. He's the head of the corner. And then over here you have the word diadem. And then I've talked before about how the Sphinx is actually pointing, or it was built to point to the division between Virgo and Leo. And I'll just read this part right here. It says, in addition, at the time the Sphinx was carved, about the time of the first intermediate period, the axis tilt of the earth and the precession of the equinoxes meant that at that time of the spring equinox, the sun was rising. As the sun was rising, the Sphinx was pointed directly at the division between Virgo and Leo. So that's what the Sphinx is pointing to. Okay, so if you move this up to September 11, Actually, I should have done it the other way, but I'll just go ahead and do it this way. That way we can see the September 23rd sign. I'll go ahead and do that first. That would be the September 23rd sign with the sun over there by Virgo's head. But if you go to September 11, you see the sun is still really close to her head, but on September 11, the sun is actually right in between Virgo and Leo. And then the other thing that happens on September 11th is that Jupiter actually crosses the line. I know some people have determined that it's around the 9th. When you actually zoom in really close, it appears to happen on the 9th, but if you look at it more from a distance, which is how you would be viewing it in the night sky, if I zoom it out, you can see that this would be more like what you would be viewing it as if you were in Jerusalem looking at the night sky. And on the 9th, it's exactly parallel to Spica, which would be the marker. You wouldn't have the lines. Your marker would be Spica. And then when you see it go past Spica, then it's clearly crossed the line at this point. And so this is when the sun would be directly in between Virgo and Leo, and it would be just underneath this capstone over here, which divides the temple or the pyramid, because I believe the pyramid in Egypt is a representation of the temple. It's actually referred to as a pillar, and this all has to do with DNA. I can talk a little bit more about that later. I believe that's why God uses the word pillar. You could see the two sticks right there, the two chromosomes, but it's referred to as a pillar in the Bible. But it says, in that day shall there be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt. So the midst is always very important, because the midst represents Jesus. It represents the restoration of the temple, because Jesus is in the middle and between the 7 candlesticks, which represent the two witnesses, the two that make up that will make up the temple, which will be the Jews and the Gentiles. And so Jesus is in the midst of the 7 candlesticks. So the midst is very important. But it says, in that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar at the border thereof to the Lord. And it shall be for a sign and for a witness unto the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt, for they shall cry unto the Lord because of the oppressors, and he shall send them a Savior, a great one, and he shall deliver them. Okay, and another thing about the word Sphinx is that it means to bind, and this would be the point where the two would bind or be joined together. And I'll just show you that over here. It says, the famous Sphinx, the giant lion with the woman's head, points exactly due east. It is so exact it cannot be an accident. The name Sphinx itself comes from the Greek sphingo, meaning bind closely together. Okay, so this all ultimately has to do with DNA. That's what it's all about. It's all about binding together. That's what Jesus came to do, to restore the DNA. And this is what is represented by Virgo, the Virgin, which represents the bride, and Leo, which represents Jesus, the bridegroom, binding together. And you see that taking place over here on 9/11. And so that may explain all the events that took place on that day. But I still have a lot more to share concerning the signs in the heavens, and I wanted to talk a little bit more about DNA, and also have some tables that I did that I believe seem to confirm this as well. But I'll have to do that in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.